So all these examples are going to be for the assignment on page 100, and I'm going to do a lot of them. So the first example is to solve the equation using any method and explain your reasoning. Explain why you did it that way. And I'm going to explain that as well. So it's important that you listen. So I'm going to say, let's have x squared equals negative 16x. The first thing that I would do here is I would think, well, I could. I mean, if I square root both sides, I have an x here, and that's weird. We haven't done that before. That's not going to help us. But I'm going to get everything to one side. I can get everything to one side. So I'll add 16x over. So that goes away. And then I get x squared plus 16x equals 0. And then I can factor out an x. That would be x times x plus 16 equals 0. And then set each piece equal to 0. So I get x plus 16 equals 0, as well as x equals 0. And I solve, and there we have it. That's the first example. I get x equals negative 16 and x equals 0. So, explain your reasoning. I know that I solved it by factoring because I can take out something in common. So I'm gonna say here are the reasons that you can use by factoring what's in common. That's the method. And why did we use that? Because they both had, so the actual reason here is because they both had an x, and they had something in common. Because they had something in common. You don't have to pay attention to the answers that are posted online. Those reasons are kind of weird, but these ones are, I feel like, more understandable. So we solved it by factoring what's in common because they had something in common. They had something in common, and that was the x. Cool. Let's move on to the second example. So here, I would, I would divide by a negative, because there's a 1. It's a negative 1 there. So I'm going to divide by negative 1. Oh, look at that. Look at that. We get x plus 5, quantity squared, equals negative 25. Oh my goodness, we know how to do this. Square root both sides. The square goes away, and I get x plus 5 equals, plus or minus. Every time you do the square root, you got to do plus or minus. And I have a negative on the inside, so that means there comes out an I. And square root of 25 is 5 without a radical, so you leave it like that. I already know it's imaginary because it has a negative inside the square root. Okay. And then I'll subtract 5 from both sides. So the way I'm going to write it is x equals negative 5 plus or minus 5i. Or you could write it two separate times. And that's usually what I like to do. Just to emphasize, I feel like I say this over and over again, emphasize that there are two different answers. Even though they're not real, they're imaginary, there's two different answers. So what did we do? We solved by square rooting. So solved by square rooting because we could get the square by itself. All we had to do is divide by that negative 1. If we can get the squared term by itself and there's no other x's, then we can solve by square rooting. So because we could get the squared term alone, and there were no other x's. And there were no other x's. Cool. That's the two. There's two. There's two problems. Yeah.